On the May 15th, 2015 episode of The Daily Show, Jon Stewart conducted an interview with author and scholar Reza Aslan. It was during this interview that Aslan presented the following argument.
There's this misconception that people derive their values from their scriptures. And the truth is that it's more often the case that people insert their values into their scriptures. Without interpretation, scripture is just words on a page. It requires somebody to read it, to encounter it, for it to have any kind of meaning. And obviously, in that transaction, you are bringing yourself, your views, your politics, your social ideas into the text. How you read scripture has everything to do with who you are. God does not make you a bigot, you're just a bigot.
The violence, that is a good point.
This is not the first time that Aslan has said this. He made the same argument while being interviewed by Cenk Uygur on the Young Turks.
My argument is that religion, like any ideology, can be used to promote good and bad. It can be used to promote life and death. And the fundamental difference of how you decide, how you sort of interact with that ideology has everything to do with the individual and nothing to do with the text itself.
Until somebody reads it and interprets it for themselves, religious text has no meaning. The idea here is that people use their religion as a roundhouse for everything that already shapes them as an individual. Their opinions, their values, their politics, their social ideas, etc. However, someone could easily argue that religion plays a big role in shaping an individual's opinions, values, politics, social ideas, etc. And if they did, we'd be stuck running around in circles. One person says people insert their values into their religion, the other person says rubbish, they get their values from religion, no the chicken, no the egg, no the chicken, no the egg, and around and around and around we go. Because these statements are more like personal opinions than they are hard evidence or reasoning, the argument could go on like this forever. So what exactly is Reza Aslan using to back this argument up? Let's take a second look at his Daily Show interview and find out.
People insert their values into their scriptures. I mean, otherwise, every Christian who read the Bible would read it exactly the same way. In this country, not 200 years ago, both slave owners and abolitionists not only use the same Bible to justify their viewpoints, they use the same verses.
Ah, okay, well that much is true. It is correct to say that culture, politics, and whatever free thinking an individual indulges in will certainly have an effect on how they practice their religion. Indeed, this does explain why there are so many variations between members of the same religion. But remember, this is not Reza Aslan's argument. This is what he is using to support this argument. And when we couple the two together, what we have is a non sequitur. People do not derive their values from scripture because not everyone reads their scripture the same way. So let's get this straight. Unless every member of every religion derives the same exact catalog of values, that's proof enough that nobody derives any values from their religion at all? You know what? This isn't just a non sequitur. This is flat out unsophisticated. This is by definition a bigoted argument. Because there is an unconditional discipline observed in every religion, they're all meaningless? Look, Aslan is correct to point out that religions are practiced in different ways by different people, but he goes too far when he concludes that that makes religion null and void. What, unless everyone follows all of it, they follow none of it? This is way too black and white to be realistic. A more nuanced thinker with even a mediocre understanding of reflective equilibrium would conclude that this issue is about as complex and as complicated as the human brain itself. Reflective equilibrium is basically a matter of balancing your beliefs based on both general principles and particular judgments. It can explain how there are an infinite number of ways in which people can practice a religion. Some people take most of it literally and act upon it. Some people take most of it literally but don't act upon it. Some people mostly interpret it. Some people take certain parts literally and other parts figuratively. Some people use it for their own personal fulfillment. The list of different ways in which people can interact with a religion goes on forever. So to say that everybody uses religion the same way, in this case as if it were a blank canvas, is quite frankly, no pun intended, painting with too broad of a brush. It's an overgeneralization, which is ironic coming from someone who tends to accuse others of making generalizations. How does that happen? Well, perhaps the better question to ask is, how does Reza Aslan respond when his argument is challenged?
And I know that's hard for people to understand.
because they just assume that religious people are robots, that they read something and then like it tells them to go do something and then they go do it. Except that that's just not how it works, people.
Notice, someone could watch that and walk away with the impression that the only other people with a dog in this fight are arguing that religious people follow every letter of their religion literally as if they were robots. It goes without saying that not everybody who disagrees with Aslan thinks that way, but it also goes without saying that is a very bad argument. The idea that zero religious people think for themselves or deviate from their religious doctrine is a very narrow-minded and bigoted position to take. And while Aslan would definitely argue against it, he is regrettably doing so from the opposite extreme, which is no less narrow-minded nor bigoted by design. The proper position to take is somewhere between the two, in this gray area, which we'll call religion plays a definite role in religious violence, there are usually other factors worth taking into consideration, every case is different, not every member of the religion is a problem, let's go find some statistics. Somewhere in here is the most reasonable position to take, and the sooner we have honest debates, the sooner we can narrow this field down and discover where this best position lies. But unfortunately, that process is being stifled by people like Reza Aslan, all the way off to the side, arguing that religion has no effect on anything or anyone. Sometimes. On the Young Turks, Aslan argued that people insert their values always, but on The Daily Show, he argued instead that this is more often the case. It was also on The Daily Show, he argued that it requires interpretation for the text to have any meaning. But on Fusion, he pointed out how Jesus was patently against capitalism, and that a lot of American Christians simply disregard that part. Well, which is it? Do people insert their values in all cases or only in some cases? Does the text have definite meaning that ends up getting cherry-picked? Or does the text have no meaning and is therefore only up for interpretation? These are all different arguments, but they're being packaged as one and the same. Not to mention, Aslan appears to even further contradict himself when he says things like this.
The entire point of a democracy is that you're supposed to vote according to your own ideals and values. And those values, for a great majority of Americans, are religious values.
Yeah, religious values. Even though they didn't get those values from religion and they'd still have them without their religion, they are nonetheless religious values. You know, the more we deconstruct this argument, the more meaningless it appears to be. This is truly good enough to be a Monty Python skit.
Look, if I argue with you, I must take up a contrary position.
But it isn't just saying no, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Assuming that this is Reza Aslan's argument, and we're only assuming that because he did say it, well, it certainly does seem as though he was trying to construct a deep and thought-provoking argument. But unfortunately, this whole everything to do with the individual and nothing to do with the text way of thinking it's just another oversimplified answer that neglects circumstance and negates human psychology. To think that such a colossal claim could be backed up with just a few examples of one holy book being read two different ways is not only lazy, but disingenuous, and it just doesn't help us better understand religion or its influence on the world.
This is the problem, is that you make these facile arguments, has everything to do with the individual and nothing to do with the text itself. These kinds of conversations that we're having aren't really being had in any kind of legitimate way. That's Jeffrey Thayer's piece, which I'm pretty sure was written by just slamming his head on a keyboard. We're using 2 or 3 examples to justify a generalization.
Both slave owners and abolitionists not only use the same Bible to justify their viewpoints, they use the same verses.
That's actually the definition of bigotry.
All right, fair enough.
Kind of makes you dizzy. Something is askew.